Go the Distance. Chapter 5. The Backside of Water. They were falling. At least that's what it felt like as Pegasus dove straight down and Meg clung desperately to his neck. She could feel the wind rushing past her, whipping her ponytail into her face as they continued to plummet. Don't look, don't look, don't look, she told herself. You went up. You have to come down. Everything is fine. You rode up to Mount Olympus had been almost peaceful. She was alive. She was in Hercules' arms, and he was suddenly a god. Just one of those things was enough to put her in a blissful state of wonder. But traveling with this flying beast was different. And why did she sense Pegasus was enjoying her panic? Pegasus dipped again, and Meg let out another terrified scream. She squeezed his neck even tighter and opened her eyes against her better judgment. The horse was bobbing and weaving around the clouds so fast, Meg was sure she was going to be sick. She wanted off this ride. Hey, you! Meg tugged on his blue mane. If you don't want me to drag you down to Poseidon and make you a seahorse, then slow down already. She heard Pegasus neigh unpleasantly, but he slowed down to an acceptable glide. Thank you, Meg said, and Pegasus snorted softer that time. Meg loosened her grip on his mane and looked around. Confucia was growing closer. They were near enough that she could make out a few mountains and bodies of water on the island. Look, Peg. Can I call you Peg? Pegasus gave a half-hearted neigh. I don't like this any more than you do. Hercules wanted me to take you on this quest. Pegasus quietly continued to flap his majestic wings. The quicker we find what we're looking for, the quicker we can both go home. Wherever that is, she muttered herself. So let's find this flute and get out of here. Deal? Pegasus neighed louder, seeming almost happy. As he dipped again, the clouds cleared, giving way to bright sunshine and turquoise-blue waters below. They glided so close to the water, Pegasus's wings actually skimmed the waves. Finally, they made it to the island's sandy beach. She climbed off Pegasus and patted his side. Nice landing there, Peg. She unhooked the saddlebag where she had tucked the hourglass and placed it on the sand. Why don't you get yourself a drink and take a fly around this island before we explore? Pegasus neighed and took flight again, giving Meg a moment to look around. Confucia was pretty impressive at first glance. The sandy white beach surrounded a forest full of lush greenery, pink-flowered bushes, and large orange trees. In the distance she could see a waterfall atop a green mountain. The sound of birds was the only noise she heard. There was no sign of boats or footprints or smoke. The island appeared to be uninhabited. Meg raised her eyes to the sun and felt the warmth on her face. Maybe Confucia was Elysium on Earth. Maybe she could hide out there and no one would even notice. There was no Hades around to torture her, no gods to remind her of her mother's loss, or Aegeus's betrayal. Here she could just be. Was it so wrong to want to skip the quest and spend her days lying on the warm sand, eating fruit, watching the waves? But then there was Hercules to think about. Do you love my son? She heard Hera ask again in her mind. Meg looked at the saddlebag a few feet away. He had been so thoughtful to pack her a few things, even in the last few precious moments they'd shared together. She wanted more time with him, of that she was certain, and that meant she had a job to do. Striding across the sand, Meg pulled the small hourglass out of the saddlebag. There was only a dusting of pink at the bottom of the glass, but grains were falling at a steady rate, almost as if they were taunting her. You're already running out of time, they seemed to say. Turning her attention to the rest of the bag, Meg found fruit and water along with a smaller pouch perfect for holding the orchid and the hourglass. Slipping her hand in, she found something else tucked inside. A slingshot. The Y-shaped handle looked hand-carved, while the tubing in the pouch were made from worn leather. Carved into the handle was a small fist, which she took to mean strength. Meg looked up at the heavens. Wonder Boy, she said softly, you're full of surprises. Thank you. Placing the hourglass and flower carefully in the pouch with the slingshot, she used the cord from the saddlebag to fasten it to her waist. She wanted to carry her most important items with her. Of course, she was kind of destroying the saddlebag in the process, but she could always put the food in Pegasus's other pouch when he returned. Where was Pegasus, anyway? It didn't look like that big of an island. He could have taken a lap around and been back in a minute, and yet there was no sign of him. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Why did she suddenly feel like she was being watched? Meg stared at the water, which had gone quite still, and then looked up toward the mountains, now covered in the cloud shadows. That's when she saw a speck in the sky. Peg was flying toward her. He swooped down over the beach and landed right in front of her. Am I glad to see you? For a second I thought you abandoned me. Peg snorted in annoyance. Yeah, I know, loyalty and all that. But you were gone a while. Find anything good? Peg reared up on his hind legs and neighed louder. Then he motioned with his head to follow him. You did find something, huh? Meg trailed behind him across the beach, rubbing her arms, which were now cold. Any chance it's the flute? Pegasus galloped ahead, stopping at the edge of a rocky part of the shoreline. Beyond it was a row of palm trees nestled among the thick brush. Beyond that, she could hear a familiar sound coming softly from the woods. It definitely sounded like a wood instrument. She hadn't even been on the island a half hour, and already she sort of located Athena's flute. Maybe this quest was going to be easier than she thought. Nice job, Peg. She patted the horse's side. I think I'll keep you around. He snorted. When you flew over the island, did you see the Alus or just hear it? Peg snorted and pawed at the sand with his front hoof. She watched as the horse shuddered. Something had unnerved him. She wished she spoke flying horse. Why don't you give me a lift so I can give an island an aerial view? Peg knelt down on his front legs, bending so that Meg could easily climb atop him. Once she was settled, he took off into the air. This time, she noticed Peg didn't jostle her or dive between clouds at a breakneck second. Progress. The flute was nowhere to be seen, although she could still hear it, and it definitely sounded closer now than it had been on the beach. She had to be getting warmer. Maybe it was on a mountaintop. She wouldn't put it past a god to accidentally drop a beloved instrument mid-flight. Peg, take a right, Meg said, hearing the sound of rushing water. Pegasus flew lower, and the waterfall she spotted from the beach came directly into view. The flute's melody grew louder. Meg directed the horse to a patch of grass next to waterfall. Let's head over there. We've got to be close. As she dismounted, the sound of the water overpowered the flute, but Meg could still hear its music calling to her. Where was the wind instrument? Meg took a step closer to the mountain. It sounds like it's coming directly from the water, if that's even possible. Unless... Meg stared at the swift water collecting in the pool in front of her, and wondered. Maybe the flute is stuck in a rock or something. Meg moved toward the stones and spotted an opening. The waterfall concealed an entrance to a cave. She could just make out a small path. Meg lifted a vine covering the way, and the flute hit a sudden high note, causing 3 birds in the nearby trees to take flight. Peg, the music is coming from inside a cave. The question is, where and why? She paused. I guess there's only one way to find out. Meg took a step forward, and Peg rushed in front of her. I know it's a bit scary, but I have no choice. I've got to go in there. Peg rose up on his hind legs. Meg couldn't help thinking of Phil. The satyr would never let Hercules blindly go into a cave emanating mysterious music without a plan. What if I take a weapon with me? She suggested. Hercules gave me a slingshot. I just need a few rocks. She grabbed a few and placed them in the bosom of her dress, afraid that if she added them to the pouch, they would squash the orchid. See, I'm completely prepared for anything now, Meg said, turning toward him. The rocks tumbled out. Okay, maybe I need a plan B. She pinned the orchid to the inside flap of the satchel and placed the rocks on the pouch instead. That'll do the trick. Pegasus still looked uneasy, but he didn't protest as she headed toward the entrance again. Suddenly the flautist started playing louder, the notes coming faster, like a wave, settling into a melodic frenzy. Meg froze. The tune was very familiar. A few more twisted notes sprang out from the water, and then it clicked into place. It was the first song she'd ever taught herself to play, The Plight of the Lily. She clutched the slingshot firmly in her right hand and let her pouch for the hourglass to make sure it was still there. Guess I'd better get this over with, Meg said it to Peg, who started to follow. No, you stay here. Peg neighed. I appreciate the sudden loyalty, Peg, but I've got this. Besides, if I need a quick getaway plan, you're it. She held up the slingshot. I'll be fine. Peg pawed at the ground, but Meg gave him an encouraging smile. Still clutching her slingshot, she headed over to the waterfall, pushing aside thick, intertwined vines. The back side of the waterfall was deafening, making it difficult for Meg to still hear the flute, but she kept shuffling along till the cave finally opened up in front of her, a chasm of rock and dripping water. From here the flute's melody could be heard out loud and clear again. Well, well, someone does live here, Meg said to herself as she stared at the series of lit torches lining the stone walls. At the sound of her voice, the flute suddenly stopped, and the torches dimmed, shrouding the cave in shadows. Games, huh? Meg's voice echoed in the darkness. That's fine, I know how to play games. Having lived in the underworld for a spell, she was not scared of darkened caves, nor of the monsters that lived inside. What did worry her, however, was not knowing the type of monster that she was about to face. She grabbed a dimmed torch from the wall and walked slowly, her eyes scanning the dark path in front of her. She didn't see any other tunnels. There was only one way into this cave, it seemed, and one way out. She started walking. When Meg finally looked back, the waterfall was just a speck in the distance. She could hardly hear it anymore. The only sound was the water trickling from the mossy condensation on the stones surrounding her. In the distance she heard the flute. It sounded far away again. How big is this cave, she wondered. Quickening her step, the torches ahead of her roared back to life. The path was widening, too. She was finally getting someplace. The music was calling to her, beckoning her to come closer, and though every bone in her body told her she could be walking into a trap, she had to keep going. The only one who can save you now is you. Trust yourself. She was the master of her own destiny. Taking a deep breath, she held the torch in front of her and kept going. She was not leaving without Athena's flute. The music grew louder as the path curved downward and brightened. Are my eyes adjusting to the dark, or is there really a light up ahead? She wondered. As she turned the corner, she saw a path leading to a waterfall. Was it another waterfall, or the same one she'd come from? Had she gone in a complete circle? She wasn't sure. She heard the flute again and turned around. This time, the sound had come from the other direction. To her right was the second path. She made the turn and headed down it. At the end, she found herself in a large cavern where a beautiful woman sat atop a throne carved out of rock and played Athena's double flute. Meg was mesmerized. The woman was lost in the music, her eyes closed as she played the double reed pipe. Her head bobbled and swayed, her long jet-black hair sweeping around her bare shoulders. She wore a flowing peach gown with a train that swept across the length of the room, wrapping the space in fabric. Meg looked at the flute in wonder. Legend had it, Athena had thrown the flute away in disgust because playing it distorted her face and ruined her beauty. This woman, however, practically glowed as the notes escaped her flute. Meg listened with rapt attention, finding herself overcome with emotion. She played far better than anyone Meg had ever heard before. She felt a sudden pang. Whoever this woman was, she was meant to keep Athena's flute. It took Meg a moment before she realized she had drifted closer to the throne to listen. Still, the woman didn't look up. Meg closed her eyes and let the tune take her to a different time and place, to that little village, and the sound of her mother sleeping soundly in her bed as Meg practiced by the window. Meg was suddenly sleepy, too. Would it be so wrong to lie on the ground and rest for a spell? Meg started to drop to her knees. Megara! Megara! Be alert! She heard a voice in her head command. Meg snapped out of her trance, opened her eyes, and gasped. The woman was now standing inches from her face, the double flute of Athena held tightly in her hands. Her blue eyes were the exact color of the sea surrounding the island, and her skin was a luminescent milky white. She stared at Meg a moment before circling her slowly. Meg tried to remain calm. She felt so tired, like she could sleep for 1,000 years. You play beautifully, Meg said, trying to focus. I know the tune well. Yes, the woman replied, and Meg noticed the words sounded almost like a hiss. Meg felt her heart beat faster. I used to play it all the time. Meg clutched the slingshot tighter in her right hand and prayed the woman didn't see it. The woman looked harmless enough, but every fiber of Meg's being told her not to believe appearances. She stood rigid as the woman's eyes swooped over her face. Have you come to play for me? The woman whispered. Play? Meg tensed. Hera had said nothing about her having to play the flute. Had she? Had she asked Meg if she could play? But could and would were two different things. The last time she played, no. She didn't want to think about that moment. Here and now she had a chance to get the everything that would change her fate. She needed to focus. Some say I play well enough to put Cerberus to sleep. The woman's blue eyes widen. If you like, I will show you. Meg held out her hands. The woman surveyed Meg curiously, clearly considering the offer. Finally, she held the flute out to her. Meg felt her breath quicken. The double reed was beautifully made compared to the tarnished mess she had once owned. She pushed her doubts aside and locked eyes with the woman as she slowly moved her head forward. Her fingers grazed the reed pipe, and everything in front of her burst into flame.